Taylor Swift's 12th album, The Life of a Showgirl, is out. It marks the long-awaited reunion with 1989 and Reputation architects Max Martin and Shellback. You guys know the drill. I'll discuss the album so far and give my honest thoughts on the record before going track by track and assigning a score. The prelude of a Showgirl. Just a year ago, Taylor released The Tortured Poets Department, a commercial smash, but one that did divide critics. This was dropped during her European leg of the legendary Eras tour. At the time, she was also actually recording and writing her 12th record, flying to Sweden in her downtime, working on it with Max Martin and Shellback. Swift also had a pretty wild 2025 when you think about it. She regained control of her original masters and even got engaged to her football-playing boyfriend, Travis Kelce. In August, Swift would tease the album with a glittery orange background, a Spotify playlist that says, "And baby, that's show business for you," which had 22 different Max Martin produced tracks. The album was properly announced on her fiance's podcast New Heights, and she would unveil 3 different versions of the album as well. Promotion thereafter consisted mostly of these countdowns for different variants of the album on vinyl. She would announce a theatrical release party for the album with the music video for The Fate of Ophelia and lyric videos and some explanations for the songs, and then, the album dropped. So let's just get into my overall thoughts. I'll be real, guys, the aesthetics of the album do not match the music. I think that the photo shoot for Midnights weirdly perfectly fits this album. Sonically, it ended up way more down-tempo and rock influence than I expected. Not to say that there aren't any upbeat, radio-friendly hits in here, but it felt like false advertisement. You have all these beautiful pictures of her dancing and performing, and none of those songs warrant that energy. I was actually coming in expecting, some unseasoned Lady Marmalade. Instead, we got Lady Margarine. I feel like part of why I didn't love this album was because no singles had come out before the album to set a realistic expectation for its true sound. She's been selling albums sight unseen for 5 years now after the Lover era because, that single run was a disaster, but it would have really been nice to see her set the tone for the rollout. This album's marketing felt so impersonal with the zillions of variants and the countdowns for copies. Gatekeeping things for the movie release party was a very smart business move, but also just a weird decision overall. Compared to all of her other works, this one really just felt like a product and not an actual project. To make things worse, very early in the cycle, Taylor hinted that this album would manage to fuse the storytelling of folklore with the poppier banger sounds of 1989, which ultimately was just hype and not fact. I will be fair, it is hard to marry those two worlds together. Pop itself as a genre, and as producer Max Martin understands, is a no-frills environment that's very hook for a story later, and less compatible with Swift's more flowery prose-like writing as of the late. Which is why on these tracks it was just very hard for me to grasp a melody or even lyrics on my first listen. Occasionally, I'd be thrown off by an odd line or a production choice that just made me pause and lose the vibe of the song. Effective pop, like her work on 1989, is meant to feel seamless, where the lyrics and the music fit together and don't feel at odds with one another. None of the tracks here will really reach the heights of New Romantic's delicate Blank Space or Style, because they just don't have that sense of restraint, simplicity, and timelessness to them. I will say, though, of all of the albums, this one did actually feel most in dialogue with Midnights textually and sonically. Midnights hinted showgirl aesthetics in the Bejeweled music video and ended as a kind of resigned record about a dead-end romance without marriage. Showgirl seems to be like an answer to that. On Eldest Daughter, she does actually confess that she lied and she, really wanted to be married, which is a direct answer to Lavender Haze's, nonchalance and denialism. I wish she had done more with that theme. I felt like thematically this was a reincarnation of Reputation's bombastic, sharp tone with a love story embedded inside, but just not nearly as well executed or relatable. And also, I just did not pick up on an overarching narrative for this album. On one hand, it could be a little bit refreshing to just be able to shuffle the order of an album without feeling robbed of a front-to-back story, but this title just felt so right for a loose story about a showgirl's life, and that's what I came in expecting. On a lyrical level, a chunk of this was just too interested in shock value than telling a story. You can hear that on Actually Romantic or Cancelled. I think Wooden itself is a fun breather and surprisingly one of the better attempts at shock and awe, but still, the use of slang and memes and terminologies like cancelled or girl boss make this record feel dated already. Swift's previous music aged so well because I think she and the world at large were just less terminally online. Initially, I wondered if the lyricism being this surface level and, well, bad was a satirical choice, but if it was, where is the call to action? A parody is something that makes fun of something, but satire has purpose, criticizing topics using style, delivery, and tropes. Taylor has done satire very well in the past. Blank Space is an effective satire because it uses the pop genre to poke fun at the perception of her being a serial dater, even daring the subject of the song to join the list. Nothing here has that same effect. Tonally, I do appreciate this album's shift from the drearier sounds of Tortured Poets. Taking a break from Jack Antonoff does keep things a little bit fresh, but Max and Shellback's production at times felt uneven. I felt like certain tracks like Honey and Cancelled felt undercooked, while other tracks like Opalite, The Fate of Ophelia, and Wood are production ear candy. I do wish that they had reheated some of the Eternal Sunshine sound with the strings and the orchestral arrangements to give this more texture and body. The biggest crime that this album commits to me is not having anything new to say. I've loved Taylor since OG Fearless because each of her albums has had some sort of cogent thesis statement. Even last year's Tortured Poets Department, which had mixed reviews, was essentially boiled down to a necessary manic episode. A lot of people have been in that situation where they mistake that for love, and her albums, they touch on different aspects of her life, but all of these parts eventually intersect, and we come to learn something new about her, and sometimes even ourselves. None of this happened for me on this record. Everything that has been said on here has been done better before. Showgirl has no real statement, it just feels like random musings from an out-of-touch billionaire. We jump from a diss track about Charlie XCX to I'm not sorry about being friends with MAGA supporters, who cares, to Travis's dick, to a story about a showgirl named Kitty, and there's just no thematic tissue that binds all of these ideas together. What we get is ultimately a grab bag of songs that don't feel like they belong to a realized project or concept, an island of misfit toys, and defective ones at that too. I think it's impressive that she's been around for 2 decades and this is her first ever miss for me. This is the first one I did not love on first listen, and this is the first one I will probably never revisit. It has very few highs, very noticeable lows, but then again, Taylor Swift has as many albums as there are months in a year, much like the months themselves. Some people love certain months, other people hate certain months, and that applies here. This was just not my month. Which brings me to the track by track. The Fate of Ophelia is a solid opener and probably the most memorable melody here. I was getting a Marina and the Diamonds Fruit vibe from this. It has dream pop energy. I think the nod is towards the Shakespeare play Hamlet. Ophelia is this tragic figure who drowns herself once her father dies, which seems to be directly referenced on the main album cover. I think the music video actually looks really good. The simple piano element of this track is the heartline of it, and towards the end she escalates it with some really good ad-libs. Probably one of her better single choices. Elizabeth Taylor starts with this dramatic lament. It's a mid-tempo track. Taylor's made no secret of her love of the classic actress. She's always referenced her with visuals and songs, and now we get a full track, and it's surprisingly really disappointing. I think it was the first definite skip I have on this album. I feel like the chorus is just very well developed. I'd cry my eyes violet, be my NY when Hollywood hates me, been #1 but never had two. She really sets up this loneliness well, but the verses are just Temu, Lana Del Rey. Norman Rockwell cosplay. Opalite was a pretty good track for me. I love the beachy vibe to it. I've never heard Max do Fleetwood Mac. I did like the little breathy ad-libs that give it a nostalgic edge. It feels very familiar, but also kind of new. The hook itself has this dress-like delivery where it's feathery on the O's towards the end, and I feel like that gives it a distinction. There's a very bubblegum, disco, pop sheen to it that kind of makes me think of this as a happier take on, say, Post Malone Circles. The bridge has a really interesting key change and a cool vocal moment where she sets up that final chorus. I think it probably will be the second single or one that gets a video, and probably the only other track I would save. Father Figure is a disaster. I felt like it was disrespectful to kind of interpolate George Michael's iconic track. This track has some of the harshest lyrics. It seems to be about Scott Borchetta, and it directly kind of homages classic mob stories like The Godfather. And there's kind of an ironic shift towards the end where Taylor takes on a persona herself to, kind of showcase how cyclical this like abusive nature of the music industry is, because now she's the mob boss. But it feels mean-spirited in a way, especially considering what happened with Olivia Rodrigo. It just felt icky. Eldest Daughter is a track 5 that is very stripped down. It does not feel like your average Max Martin production. It's an acoustic confessional. It's also one of the worst songs that she's ever released in years. The chorus just threw me for a loop. I am not a bad bitch and this isn't savage is a cute nod to Megan Thee Stallion, but it feels so out of place, so distracting. Not to invoke Marina yet again, but it also feels like a poor man's take on Teen Idol. The verses are a little bit better than the chorus. When I said I don't believe in marriage, that was a lie is a pretty direct hit. But as a track 5 though, this is her worst track 5 yet, which is criminal because track 5s have always been integral to the Taylor kind of like canon. And when your track 5 is bad, the album's bad. It feels like a bad version of Sweet Carolina by Lana Del Rey as well, like in the terms of like trying to integrate modern language into like a classical piano feel. There's that line in Sweet Carolina where she talks about iPhone 11 and then rhymes it with fuck you, Kevin, which I thought was beautiful and worked in the context because it was like a one-time thing. It's not the chorus of the song. This song is just a chop. I hated it. Ruin the Friendship kicks it back to her country roots, and I think it's the closest that she gets to really marrying the folklorian storytelling style with a pop sound. She talks about her time in high school. The chorus sees her lament not kissing this guy even though he had a girlfriend. Verse 2 feels so love triangle trilogy. Her describing that prom and how he looked at her just felt very real, and the refrain is catchy, and then we just get this revelation in the hook that the song is actually really about, or likely about, the guy that she wrote Forever Winter about. She flies home and goes to this guy's funeral and expresses regret that she didn't ruin the friendship back then. It's a very devastating and probably the realest track on this album. Actually Romantic is the one that everyone wants to talk about. It's the infamous Charlie XCX diss track that's, kicking off new levels of discourse that I just have to mute words for. I have to say it's disproportionate to Charlie's Sympathy is a Knife, which was really less of a diss and more of a confessional about insecurity and her place in the industry at large, and not necessarily like a Taylor diss. And without us really knowing the details of what happened, there could be other details, it just feels like it's punching down. Like the lines, I heard you call me boring Barbie when the coast got you brave, they just don't fit the crime. Sonically and production-wise, it is pretty interesting. There's like a Weezer, Say It Ain't So, Pixies, Where's My Mind feel to the instrumental, which, is nice. I've always wanted her to go for a rock vibe, which she does at times in this album. I did actually chuckle a little bit at the Chihuahua purse line, but I don't know. It's no better than Revenge. It's not even a Bad Blood. And the bridge, it nearly got me, but the wet line just feels Regina George. It makes it a chop. Wishlist is one of the more romantic tracks on this record. It kind of gave me a Gorgeous 2.0 vibe and sound. It's actually the closest to rep that she gets on this album. There are shifts in the track that keep it dynamic, like production-wise. There's like a little bit of a synth wobble that creates a sense of disorientation in the second verse, which I think is a really cool trick that Max and Shellback do to keep you awake. The track name checks all these grand wishes people have and then contrast it with her simple wishes for a suburban life with privacy and a basketball hoop in the driveway. But for a love song of hers, it just felt so generic. There's very little specificities. There's no dopamine hit. It does not, it just feels like platitudes that kind of register trad wife. Very shallow, and I kind of wanted a little more from it. Wood was the one that I was genuinely scared for my life for, but it actually ended up being one of the more liked tracks of mine. I think the instrumental reminded me of the Jackson 5 and this one obscure Ariana Grande song that Max produced a couple years ago called They Don't Know for the Trolls soundtrack. It's a playful double entendre track about, Travis's hardware, and I thought about Sabrina when she did the Open My Thighs line just because it's so risk for Taylor, but lyrically, the moxie that I'd expect from Carpenter or early prime era Katy Perry is there, but it just lacks the commitment. In order to really sell this, like, over the top sexy, you kind of have to have this confidence to it, you know, and it just like a wink, it just didn't register to me. Though I did really like the little talk rap that she does at the end of the chorus. It's very catchy. It reminded me of the bridge of I Think He Knows. Cancelled had opening parts that really faked me out into thinking that this was gonna be a rock-influenced track. I thought the cadence of the verses kinda reminded me of Avril Lavigne's Rock and Roll, so it had me hyped, but then the chorus just has this very robotic, dry, mechanic delivery. My sibling had told me that it reminded them a bit of Yellow Flicker Beat by Lorde, but terrible, and I just could not unhear it. To make things worse, the track's subject matter is about her keeping company with controversial figures, like, say, Brittany Mahomes and the Barstool Gang and MAGA, and I not caring about it. Just a chop, just a skip. Which is a shame because the production is actually pretty fine. Honey is a sonic curveball that sees Taylor dip her toes back into R&B, which was a space that she kind of tried in Reputation at moments. Her vocals on this were actually the most interesting on the entire record. She's never really been the best vocalist to me, but she gets to really spread her range here. The flutes in the middle of the song just make it feel so fresh, and I think the production, though, like overall, aside from like little nice moments here and there, is probably what holds this track back. It felt a little too stripped back and undercooked. I wanted a little bit more pizzazz. I think this would have been a really great track to reinforce the showgirl aesthetic and the vibes. I think some brass, some more woodwinds would have made this shine a bit more. Ironically, I think this is the one track that I think Jack Antonoff should have produced. And the final track is the title track, which kind of delivers a little bit on that promise of bringing the folklorian writing style to the pop sound. I never really thought I would hear Carpenter on a Max Martin production, and I really hope she takes a detour to Sweden. I would love for her to work with Max. I think lyrically, this is actually one of the more developed songs. It's this character study about Kitty, this woman who parallels Taylor in life but is a showgirl, and then the chorus is Kitty telling her, like, this world sucks. Being a woman in entertainment makes you give up so much to be adored. You should not want this life. Which Taylor defies, and then the bridge sees Taylor and Sabrina dip into musical theater in their sound and point out how dispensable they are. Sabrina did very well vocally here, but you could tell that she did not have her pen game. Like, she did not have credits on this. I can see this having a visual, though. The ending kind of reminds me of the closing moments of Chicago, where the two women close out the show and thank the crowd and basically get away with crime. Not terrible for a closer. Overall, The Life of a Showgirl is a miss for me. I came in expecting a return to bangers. We just ended up with something mid-tempo, and it kind of feels like she has creative burnout. I think that she's done way better than this. She's done nearly every sound, concept, and idea better in the past. But I think that's fine. You know, Swift is, you know, for better or for worse, too big to flop, and I think we'll just get another probably better record in a year's time. So I'm giving this a 5.8 out of 10. And that's a wrap. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of The Life of a Showgirl. I honestly have been covering Taylor forever. You know me for my video essays. I've actually made hours of content about how brilliant her music is, and I think this is the first time I've just not liked it. And honestly, that's fine. If you loved it, let me know what you loved below. I want to give a shout out to my members. Thank you so much for supporting my channel and taking that extra step. A thank you to my subscribers for your patience. I normally have reviews out the day after, but I do like sitting down with records, and honestly, like, to be fair, if I had posted the video that I had written the night that this album came out, I feel like it would have not accurately reflected my thoughts on this, for better or for worse. I have a couple of retrospectives for the rest of the year planned out, as well as my year-end list and other coverage for albums that may surprisingly come out of the ground. So follow me for more if you liked my insights, and thank you so much for your time. I'm really grateful that you take the time to listen to my thoughts and hear me out on things. Hope to see you next video.